3 police cruisers blocked my driveway before I even finished unloading my truck. Red and blue lights flashed across my garage door. Neighbors stepped onto their lawns. Phones were already recording. And standing right behind the patrol cars, arms crossed, chin lifted like she owned the air, was the HOA president. "There he is," she shouted, pointing straight at me. "That's the man I told you about. He's trespassing. Trespassing. On my own property." An officer walked up, hand resting on his belt. "Sir, we received a complaint that you're unlawfully occupying this residence." I looked at my house. Fresh paint. New roof. Contractors inside finishing the floors I paid for. "I'm unlawfully occupying my own house," I asked calmly. The HOA president stepped forward, her voice louder now, making sure every neighbor could hear. "He doesn't belong here. He's not part of this community. We have rules." Murmurs spread across the street. The officer's tone hardened. "Sir, if you can't prove residency, we may have to detain you." Detain me. Behind the HOA president, I could see the street sign, the same street I had quietly purchased, lot by lot, at auction. She smirked like she'd already won. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I didn't just own this house. I owned the entire block. And they had just tried to arrest the wrong man. If you believe no one should be bullied off their own property, drop your city or state in the comments. I want to see how far this message travels. And if you stand for justice over power, hit like and subscribe, because here, truth always wins. I didn't move into that neighborhood by accident. 6 months earlier, the entire block had gone quiet after a mid-sized developer filed for bankruptcy. Half-finished renovations. Vacant homes. Unpaid contractor liens. The kind of mess most investors avoid. I didn't. I spent weeks digging through county foreclosure listings and court filings. That's when I saw it, 7 adjacent properties, including the corner lots and the private access road, all bundled into a single distressed auction. No one else bid. Within 30 minutes, I owned every parcel tied to that failed development project. What most people didn't bother reading, what I made sure to, was the HOA charter attached to the original developer. The association only held authority as long as the developer maintained majority control of the land. Once that control transferred, the structure changed. And when I bought those deeds, majority control transferred. Quietly. I didn't move in with announcements or neighborhood meetings. I hired contractors. Repaired roofs. Cleaned yards. Paid off back taxes. I stayed polite. Low profile. Focused. The existing HOA board, however, had grown used to ruling over homeowners who never checked paperwork. A week after construction began, a bright orange violation notice appeared taped to my door. Unauthorized exterior modifications. Fine, $500. I ignored it. Then came another. Failure to register as a resident. Fine, $1,000. Still, I said nothing. The board president drove by slowly one afternoon, staring like she was inspecting an intruder. She assumed I was a renter. She assumed I didn't belong. She assumed I didn't understand their rules. What she didn't assume, what never crossed her mind, was that the very road she drove on was already in my name. The notices didn't stop. They multiplied. Bright orange papers. Certified envelopes. Emails sent to an address I never provided. Every message carried the same tone, authority without verification. Final warning. Immediate compliance required. Legal action pending. I read every word. Filed every document. Took photos of each notice taped to my door like a threat. And I stayed silent. 2 weeks later, I attended my first HOA meeting. It was held in a small clubhouse at the end of the block, the same clubhouse sitting on land parcel 47B. Parcel 47B, which I owned. The room went quiet when I walked in. The board sat at a folding table at the front. The president, perfectly pressed blazer, tight smile, glanced at a clipboard. "You must be the renter from Maple Drive." "I'm the owner," I replied calmly. Light laughter rippled across the room. The treasurer leaned forward. "Sir, we know every homeowner here." I placed a certified copy of one deed on the table. The president barely glanced at it. "That property is governed by this association. You haven't registered. You haven't paid dues. You've made unauthorized changes. I suggest," I said evenly, "you review updated county records." Her smile tightened. "Don't threaten us with paperwork." "Threaten?" I nodded once and left. The next morning, I woke to the sound of heavy tires on gravel. A white SUV with community security printed on the side was parked across my driveway. A uniformed guard stood with his arms folded. "You can't block a private driveway," I told him. "Orders from the HOA," he replied. "Until compliance is confirmed, access is restricted." "Restricted?" "To property legally deeded in my name." I called the number on the side of the vehicle. The president answered. "You can't restrict my access." "You are not a recognized member of this community," she said sharply. "Until you comply with HOA regulations, you are considered a trespasser on association-controlled land." I almost laughed. Association-controlled land. They were enforcing authority over a road parcel I had purchased at auction. I asked one final time. "Are you sure you want to escalate this?" "You leave me no choice," she snapped, and hung up. By noon, 2 more board members were outside, pointing toward my contractors. "You need to cease construction immediately," the treasurer shouted. "We are filing a police report." My contractors looked at me. I gave them one instruction: keep working. An hour later, sirens echoed through the block. 3 cruisers. The same scene that would later circle through every neighborhood group chat. The president rushed toward the officers before they even stepped out. "He's refusing to leave. He's trespassing on HOA property." I stood still. Calm. Hands visible. One officer approached. "Sir, we've received a complaint that you are unlawfully occupying property owned by the association." "Which property?" I asked. "This residence and surrounding roadway." I handed him a folder. Certified deeds. Auction confirmation. Transfer stamps from the county recorder's office. He flipped through slowly. Behind him, the HOA president's voice rose. "He forged that. We have original governing documents." She held up a thick binder, outdated CC and RS printed years ago. The officer frowned slightly. "Ma'am, these documents predate the foreclosure." "They're binding," she insisted. "He's not registered." "Registration," I said calmly, "doesn't determine ownership." Her face flushed. More neighbors gathered. Phones out. Whispers spreading. The officer radioed for clarification. Another cruiser arrived. Now the tension shifted. This wasn't a simple complaint anymore. The board president stepped closer to the officers. "If he refuses to vacate, I want him detained." Detained. On land listed under my name. The officer looked at me carefully. "Sir, until this is verified, I need you to step aside." I complied. Calm. Silent. The president's smirk returned. She thought this was the moment she would win. What she didn't realize was that verification doesn't favor the loud. It favors the documented. And within minutes, a supervisor vehicle rolled onto the block. Because when ownership disputes involve multiple parcels, things tend to get complicated very quickly. The supervisor stepped out of his vehicle slower than the others. Older. Calm. The kind of officer who didn't react to noise, only to facts. "What's going on?" he asked. The HOA president rushed forward again, speaking before anyone else could. "He broke into this property weeks ago. He refuses to register." He's altering structures without approval. He's blocking association authority. The supervisor turned to me. Your name? I gave it. You claim ownership? I don't claim it, I replied evenly. I have it. I handed him the full binder. Not just one deed. All of them. 7 parcels. The roadway. The clubhouse lot. The vacant corner property. Transfer confirmations. Tax receipts already paid. Stamped. Recorded. Verified. The supervisor flipped through slowly. The HOA president's confidence began thinning. That's not possible, she said. We oversee this block. The developer signed authority to us. The developer, I said calmly, filed Chapter 11. Those assets were liquidated. That doesn't dissolve the HOA, she snapped. It does, I replied, when the charter requires developer majority control to sustain governance. The supervisor looked up. Ma'am, do you have updated filings? She held up her binder again. These are the governing documents. From what year? He asked. She hesitated. 5 years ago, the treasurer muttered quietly. The air shifted. Neighbors leaned closer. The supervisor spoke carefully. Sir, based on what I'm seeing, this appears to be a civil ownership dispute. It's not a dispute, I said. It's public record. The president's voice rose again. He's manipulating paperwork. He's intimidating the board. Ma'am, the supervisor said firmly, lower your voice. That's when she made her mistake. If you don't remove him, she said loudly, we will file a formal complaint against this department for refusing to enforce HOA authority. The entire street went silent. Threatening the police rarely goes well. The supervisor closed the binder slowly. Ma'am, he said evenly, HOA authority does not supersede recorded property deeds. Her expression changed, from confidence to something sharper. Desperation. He cannot own the road, she said. That's community property. It was auctioned, I replied. Parcel 51C. Sold with the development assets. The supervisor radioed dispatch to verify Parcel 51C. We waited. The HOA board members whispered frantically among themselves. The treasurer pulled out his phone, likely searching county records for the first time in his tenure. Dispatch crackled back through the radio. Parcel 51C shows private ownership. Transferred 6 months ago. Owner name matches subject on scene. The president froze. Repeat that, the supervisor asked. Private ownership confirmed. The supervisor looked directly at her. Ma'am, he owns the road. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. The guard from community security slowly stepped away from my driveway. The president's face flushed deep red. That doesn't mean he controls the association, she insisted. He never registered. I finally said what I'd been holding back. I own 5 of the 7 residential parcels on this block. According to your own bylaws, voting power is proportional to land ownership. The treasurer's eyes widened. She turned toward him. That's not. He cut her off quietly. It might be. The supervisor exhaled. So let me get this straight, he said. You called officers out here to remove a property owner from land legally recorded under his name. He's destabilizing our community, she argued. No, the supervisor replied calmly. He's renovating it. A few neighbors actually nodded. The board president looked around and realized something had shifted. The crowd wasn't fully behind her anymore. She pivoted. Fine, she said sharply. Then we'll take this to court. I met her eyes. I encourage that. Her confidence flickered again. You think you can intimidate us with paperwork? No, I said quietly. I think you tried to arrest the majority landholder. Silence. The supervisor stepped back toward his vehicle. This is civil. We're clearing the scene. If further harassment occurs, we'll document it appropriately. Harassment. The word lingered in the air. The cruisers began pulling away. But the damage was done. Phones had recorded everything. The board members stood frozen on the sidewalk, suddenly unsure of their authority. As the last cruiser turned the corner, the president stepped close enough so only I could hear her. "This isn't over." I nodded once. "I know." What she didn't understand was that escalation wasn't something I feared. It was something I prepared for. And within 48 hours, a certified court filing appeared at my door. Emergency petition. Motion to restrain. Claiming unlawful occupation and financial damages. She had doubled down. She hadn't learned. And now, this wouldn't be handled on the street. It would be handled in front of a judge. 2 days later, the courthouse smelled of polished wood and anxious whispers. I arrived early, walking past the intimidating columns, my folder of deeds clutched under one arm. The hallway was crowded with neighbors, attorneys, and curious observers. Rumors had already spread across the block. The new guy owns the street, and most of them were watching eagerly to see if the HOA president could actually enforce her will. Inside the courtroom, the HOA president sat at a small table with her attorney. Her perfectly pressed blazer couldn't hide the tension creeping across her face. Her hands clenched and unclenched the sides of her chair as she rehearsed lines that were already losing power. Behind her, 2 board members whispered urgently, occasionally glancing at me. When my attorney stood and handed the judge a complete binder of deeds, county filings, and foreclosure auction confirmations, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses and a calm demeanor, looked up and studied both sides. The HOA attorney opened aggressively. "Your Honor, the defendant has no legal right to these parcels," she declared. "He has ignored the association's governance, failed to register as a resident, and altered properties without approval. This community relies on rules and compliance." I remained seated, calm, letting my attorney do the talking. "My client," my attorney began, "acquired all 7 parcels through a public foreclosure auction. The transfer of ownership is verified and recorded in the county recorder's office. Furthermore, the HOA charter specifies that authority is contingent on majority developer control, which ceased when the assets were auctioned. Any claims of governance over these parcels are invalid." The judge adjusted her glasses. "Let's review the documents, please." One by one, my attorney presented deeds, tax receipts, and auction confirmations. Each parcel was accounted for. The common access road, the vacant lots, and the clubhouse lot, every single property was under my name. The judge's eyes scanned each page meticulously. Then came the courtroom's pivotal moment. "According to these documents," the judge said, "the defendant holds majority ownership across this block. The HOA's claimed authority has been rendered void by the transfer of developer assets. Any attempts to enforce governance over these properties are legally unenforceable." The room fell silent. The HOA president's face went from shock to disbelief to near panic. She whispered urgently to her attorney, who frantically flipped through outdated bylaws and notes. The treasurer's jaw dropped, and the security guard who had blocked my driveway weeks earlier looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. I leaned back in my chair, calm, almost meditative. The twist was simple. The power structure she relied upon had crumbled under legal scrutiny. Every threat she made on my driveway, every officer she summoned, every fine she tried to enforce, null. The judge continued, her tone steady and deliberate. "Furthermore, the defendant now holds controlling interest in the association due to majority land ownership. He may exercise voting rights consistent with ownership, including the ability to dissolve the board or override any existing governance." The board members whispered frantically. One of them muttered, "That's impossible." Impossible, indeed. The documents didn't lie. The county filings didn't lie. The foreclosure auction didn't lie. The president leaned forward, voice trembling. This can't be legal." The judge's gaze was unyielding. "It is legal." The law does not favor assumptions or intimidation. It favors documented ownership. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was enough. The court clerk recorded the decision, HOA claims dismissed, motion to restrain denied. The president's attorney attempted one last objection, but the judge waved it off, warning the board that any further attempts to harass the property owner could result in civil liability. Neighbors murmured. Phones recorded every second. The public humiliation of the HOA president had begun. They had called police, threatened me, tried to assert authority over land I legally owned, and every action was invalidated in one decisive courtroom twist. The real power shift was clear. I wasn't just the landowner, I was the majority stakeholder. I now had the authority to dissolve the HOA if I chose. The president's control had evaporated in the space of a single court session, leaving her floundering in front of the community she once dominated. As I left the courtroom, I glanced back. The board members avoided eye contact. The president's confident posture had vanished, replaced by frustration and panic. The twist was complete, the entire power dynamic had flipped, and it wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about control, authority, and the undeniable strength of documented ownership. She had tried to arrest me, intimidate me, and humiliate me. Instead, the courtroom had revealed the truth, the HOA's authority was gone, and every attempt to enforce it was a public failure. The crowd outside whispered among themselves. Some congratulated me. Others just stared at the defeated board. For the first time, the street felt quiet, but the silence carried weight. The twist wasn't just legal. It was personal. They had underestimated me. They had assumed fear or compliance. Instead, they faced the one thing they couldn't control: proof, law, and rightful ownership. And in that moment, I realized something crucial: power isn't taken. It's documented. The next morning, the block was buzzing in a way I had never experienced before. Neighbors I barely knew waved from driveways, some carrying phones ready to record the day's unfolding events. The HOA president arrived early, trying to regain control, but the tension clung to her like a shadow. The humiliation from the courtroom lingered visibly on her face. Every step she took was measured, defensive, cautious. Inside the now-packed HOA clubhouse, the remaining board members gathered. The treasurer whispered frantically to the secretary, both trying to consult outdated bylaws as if those alone could reverse the past 24 hours. I entered calmly, documents in hand, and a quiet determination in my eyes. I didn't need theatrics, facts were louder than threats. "Good morning," I said simply. The room was silent except for the shuffling of papers. The president attempted to interrupt, but I raised a finger, a polite gesture, though the weight behind it was unmistakable. "I'm here to discuss the next steps," I continued. "Specifically, the control of the association." Her voice faltered. "Control? You cannot." "You can," I interrupted gently, "because you no longer legally hold the majority control. The court confirmed yesterday that the HOA's claimed authority is invalid across these parcels. According to both the county recorder and the HOA's own charter, my ownership grants me controlling interest." A wave of whispers filled the room. Board members looked at one another, confusion etched on their faces. They had always ruled through intimidation, assuming no one would ever challenge their authority. Now, the foundation of their power had crumbled. One board member finally spoke, voice shaky. You can dissolve us?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I can. And I plan to follow through, in accordance with proper procedure and legal guidance. Your authority as a board is officially suspended pending this process. Any attempts to intimidate neighbors or harass property owners will be documented and may result in civil liability." The president's eyes darted around. She realized the gravity of the situation. Every face in the room, every neighbor observing from outside, could see her fallibility. The smirk that had accompanied so many threats was gone, replaced by panic and anger. Outside, contractors and neighbors gathered at the windows. I handed my attorney a stack of additional filings, ensuring every procedural step was meticulously documented. The board had no room to maneuver, no path to reclaim the narrative. I continued, voice measured but firm, "This is not personal. It's a matter of law and fairness. The documents, the court ruling, and the public record all support this action. You attempted to exert authority over land that is legally owned by another. That attempt has consequences. Any further action to harass or intimidate residents may be subject to legal penalties." A tense silence followed. The board members exchanged nervous glances, realizing the full implications. The president opened her mouth, closed it, then finally muttered, "This isn't over." I shook my head slightly, smiling softly. It is. The law doesn't bend to threats, and it doesn't favor intimidation. It favors ownership, verification, and documented truth. The treasurer, usually outspoken and defiant, cleared his throat. "So, the votes for the HOA? They go to you now?" "Yes," I said. "I now hold the controlling interest. You will cooperate in the proper dissolution process. You will notify members, file required notices, and cease all claims of authority over the parcels in question." The president's face went pale. The weight of public exposure and legal authority bore down on her. Her attempts to command fear and obedience were meaningless now. Every neighbor, every observer outside, had witnessed her failure, first at my driveway, then in court, and now in front of the board. Outside the clubhouse, whispers of victory spread quickly. Contractors smiled. Neighbors nodded. Phones captured the quiet assertion of power. The street had witnessed the reversal. The previously untouchable HOA had been publicly exposed and stripped of authority. I stood silently for a moment, letting the room digest the news. Calm, composed, and unwavering. The president finally slumped in her chair, a defeated posture replacing the arrogance she had carried for years. "You underestimated me," I said softly, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You assumed fear or compliance. Instead, you faced proof, law, and rightful ownership. That's something no intimidation can override." The board members looked down at their hands. Some muttered apologies. Others avoided eye contact entirely. The president opened her mouth one last time, but words failed her. I gestured toward the exit. "We'll begin the proper dissolution procedure immediately. Any interference, any harassment, will be documented. The law will handle the rest." And with that, I turned, leaving the room filled with tension, shame, and the echoes of authority lost. Neighbors outside applauded softly. Contractors returned to work without obstruction. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. For the first time, the block felt quiet, but it was a quiet filled with acknowledgement, understanding, and the visible restoration of rightful control. The HOA's attempt to assert dominance had been dismantled step by step, from driveway confrontation to courtroom validation, and finally to the administrative collapse of the board itself. As I walked down the street, I could feel it, every step, every property I owned, every deed verified, it all mattered. The president had tried to arrest me on my own land. She had attempted to humiliate me publicly. But the law, the documentation, and careful strategy had ensured the reversal was total. Power had returned to the rightful hands, and justice, slow, deliberate, and undeniable, had been served. Weeks later, the street was calm again. The HOA board had officially begun the dissolution process, their authority officially suspended, their previous threats and intimidation nullified. Notices had been sent to all residents, explaining the change in control and confirming that the parcels were fully under rightful ownership. Contractors completed renovations without obstruction, and neighbors, once cautious and hesitant, now openly greeted me with nods and quiet smiles. The former HOA president had resigned. Her attempts to reclaim power had not only failed but had exposed her publicly. Neighbors now viewed her with skepticism, and the board members quietly accepted their diminished roles. Even the police department filed an internal review after realizing how the initial complaint had been mishandled. Standing on the sidewalk outside my property, I looked at the row of homes I had quietly acquired and restored. Every lot, every access road, every vacant parcel, under legal control, secured, and properly documented. The best part? Silence. Not the uneasy silence of fear, but the calm, victorious silence of justice served. They had tried to arrest me. They had tried to intimidate me. But in the end, the law, documentation, and careful strategy had ensured that power returned to the rightful hands. They thought I was trespassing, I said quietly, but it turns out they were standing on my land all along.